Greetings. This is the Native Business Podcast. This is episode 9, and my name is Gary Davis.
And my name is Carmen Davis.
And we are happy to be presenting a new episode of this amazing podcast, if I do say so myself. We're happy that you joined us. We hope that you've subscribed to the Native Business Podcast wherever you are. You can find it on any platform pretty much that exists. And at the same time, I know we want to make sure that you know where to find us online.
On our socials.
Our socials, also known as social media platforms.
On Facebook and Instagram, it is Native Business Magazine. On Twitter, it is at Native Biz Mag.
And on YouTube,
you got to search
us. You still got to use the search bar. I'm sorry. But we're working to get enough subscribers. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Yes. You can not only get the podcast there as well, but you can also watch some of the great video content that we're making here at Native Business. Great things like the video from the Mandan Hidatsa and Arikara's food sovereignty trip to the Netherlands.
Yep.
You'll see the great things that are happening there. With greenhouse, horticulture, agriculture, and all the great things that they're doing, and learn more about the Mandan Hidatsa and Arikara's Food Sovereignty Initiative.
Yep.
Big shout out to all those good folks and to Chairman Mark Fox. We have amazing content that transpired in May at the Native Business Summit. We had 24 breakout sessions. Over 300 folks joined us there for the summit, which will be taking place again next year in 2020. And so look out for that. We'll be sure to let you know when you can start registering. One of the things that we did there is some live.
Yes, we recorded
Native
6
Business podcasts.
Sessions as podcasts, and we had our guest host, Mika Leonard, who did a wonderful and amazing job.
From the Miami Tribe.
Yes, of Oklahoma.
And great content. And I think Mika will talk a little bit about this, but this particular podcast that was recorded live at the summit, from the Native Business Podcast stage, I might add, really had
just
a great...
Just say anything Native Business. Just anything started with Native Business.
Hashtag Native Business. How about that? We had a great discussion on e-commerce. And, you know, it's so important for folks to really look at the range of e-commerce opportunity that could benefit, you know, tribes in leveling the playing field, expanding the customer base, the folks that are out there doing it in e-commerce. It's not just e-gaming. It is financial services and also for entrepreneurs. You know, I remember being in Nevada at a very, very remote location at a reservation there, logistically challenged. And in speaking to some of the young folks there, some amazing artists, a ton of talent. And we're taking the creativity and in the products that they made and wholesaling it to other people to then retail it. And there's nothing wrong with the wholesale business.
Right.
I mean, people make millions and millions of dollars in wholesale business, but they don't make as much as those people that make their own products and then retail
right.
it. So if you can make the product and then take it to market and retail it, that is always the best way to go. And the internet has allowed us to be able to reach people, to be able to go out in the most remote of locations, wherever you may be.
Absolutely.
And sell to people around the world. And we have to identify the opportunity that exists to be able to get our products, services, whatever that we're trying to sell out there. And I know that when we first started one of our companies, and tell the folks how much we paid for our first e-commerce website.
I believe it was $50,000.
It was every bit of $50,000. Today, you can go and get your website. I mean, once you buy your domain name, set up your website, in somewhere between $500 and $5,000, you can get a really great website. Of course, you have some domain hosting and all that other good stuff.
Yeah.
But that pales in comparison. And I would say that if you spent $5,000 on a website today, you would be able to have a better website than what we spent $50,000 on. So there is opportunity out there for you to get your products, your services. And some people may say, well, I don't have a laptop or I don't have a desktop computer. Well, your phone is perfectly suited to be able to do all of the things that we just talked about. And you've got an amazing camera almost in every single phone that we have today. You can shoot, almost every phone now has 4K video. You can make videos for your website. You can take pictures for your website. And of course, you can engage in your social media right from your phone. So, we don't want to get into a full-blown conversation here. We want to let the good folks talk there about it. We will be, in a few episodes, I believe episode 12, be talking to one of the gentlemen that's on this panel.
Bill McClure.
We're all about helping Native business here at Native Business Magazine.
Hashtag Native Business.
There you go. I said it. So with no further ado, we would like to get over to this podcast.
Yeah, we have Chairman Shotton from the Otoe-Missouria Tribe. We have Maranda Compton. She is partner at Ness Feldman. And we have Bill McClure, who is CEO, Native American Coffee.
And of course, Mika Leonard. And with no further ado, let's go to this episode of the Native Business Podcast that was recorded live at the Native Business Summit.
My name is Mika Leonard. Welcome to e-commerce. Technology and innovation are leveling the playing field in Indian country. E-commerce opportunities provide access to new markets, consumers, and reduce economic leakages, moving economies toward an export-based strategy. Understanding how these advantages fit within other economic systems, cultures, and strategies are keys to moving from revenue-based efforts to truly developing reservation-based economies. Join this panel to learn how tribal nations are able to exercise their sovereignty and utilize their competitive advantages. Our panelists today are Miss Maranda Compton, partner, Ness Feldman, Chairman John Shotton, Otoe-Missouria Tribe, Mr. Bill McClure, CEO, Native American Coffee. So thank you all for joining me today. Why don't we start with Maranda, if you could introduce yourself, tell us what tribe you're from, what you do, kind of how you got into this line of work.
Sounds great. Hello, everyone. Walekishku, Tulawense, Maranda Compton, Nita Lenape, Nita Pokoanku Memans. My name is Maranda Compton. I am Lenape. I am an enrolled member of the Delaware Tribe of Indians. We're based in Bartlesville. Shout out for Bartlesville. I am a partner at the law firm of Ness Feldman, and I specialize in Indian law. But my personal and professional passion is economic development within Indian country. And in working in that area, I work with tribes and businesses that do business with tribes so that we can expand and develop our native nations and provide for our citizens and our people. So I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you, Mika. Thanks to Gary and Carmen Davis, and thank you all for being here.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm Bill McClure. I'm a Muskogee Creek, and I've been in the online business for 22 years and owned a number of different and invested in a number of different online businesses, and one of them just happens to be the coffee business.
And Chairman Shotton, tell us a little bit about your background.
Good morning. I'm Chairman John Shotton from the Otoe-Missouria Tribe, located just up the road in Red Rock, Oklahoma. I've been the chairman for the past 11 years or so. As a tribal leader, we're always looking at ways to improve our tribal economy, bring in additional revenue to our tribe, provide services. About 9 years ago, we were really focused on land-based options here, casinos, things like that, things that we could do. But in the area we're located in a rural part of Oklahoma, there's only so many people, there's only so much population to work with, there's only so much investment that we can provide in that little area. So we began looking at online businesses we could start. We began the financial services sector, and it's been a real game changer for us. We can actually reach customers outside of our little community. We can bring investment into our tribal jurisdiction, and we provide jobs for our tribal people. Most importantly, we can provide services through the income we derive from those online businesses. So very exciting. I really am an advocate of online e-commerce for tribes as well as financial services. I think that financial services is really a next frontier for tribes to really take advantage of the sovereignty we have. A huge advocate for financial services and online businesses and how we can utilize our sovereignty to be big players in these areas. So I'm glad to be here as a part of the conference today.
Thank you, Chairman Shotton. And I realize we're all of Oklahoma tribal heritage on this panel, which is fitting. Everybody's going to have kind of a different a lens that we're going to look at this through when we talk about e-commerce, which is definitely this term that gets floated around a lot. And I think we all, we think we know what it means. It's, the E in front of it, you're just like electronic. Okay, great. Online business. Online business takes so many different forms. I know we think about Amazon, I think is sort of the name that comes to everyone's mind, down to somebody like Bill who's selling coffee on the internet. So again, we're going to look at this sort of as a private business, a tribal business, and then Miranda's going to contextualize all of this with all of the legal factors, and there's a lot of information we're going to cover. So, earlier when I read the prompt for this session, I talked about e-commerce leveling the playing field, and I know Chairman Shotton already sort of keyed this up for us as well. I want to hear, what you all think, and again, think of this through like the different lenses that you're all bringing to the table in terms of, what does leveling the playing field mean when it comes to your personal business or your tribe or really Indian country as a whole. And I think actually I want to start back with Chairman Shotton. You'd already started talking about this a little bit. So talk about how the financial service industry, specifically the online financial service industry, is really leveling the playing field for Otoe-Missouria's business and what that means for your tribe.
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, the duty of a tribal council, tribal leader, is to find ways to improve the lives of our tribal members. And I always begin all my speeches with, without resources, I can't, no matter how good my ideas are, I can't implement them. So as a tribal leader, I've got to go out and find the resources necessary to implement all the good ideas we have at the tribal council and our tribal community. We all want better housing, we all want better health care, we all want good jobs, we all want elder service, additional daycare, all those wonderful things that people want in their communities, but these things all cost money. And we've got to find a way to bring the resources in-house to our tribes to be able to implement these great plans that we have. So my first goal as a tribal leader is, how do we bring those resources in? And at our tribe, we're not fortunate enough to be located in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Phoenix, Arizona, Miami, Florida. We're located in rural north central Oklahoma, Red Rock, Oklahoma. The town I lived in as a kid and graduated high school from, less than 400 people, probably 90% Native American, 80% of our tribe. So how do we bring resources in this community? We went the traditional routes as a tribe. We've developed C-stores. Those end up being service providers mainly for our community. We've got a few casinos, a hotel. Like I said, we're limited at some point by the population and just the wealth in our community. So as tribal leaders, we have to look at ways to bring that revenue in. And some tribes have been successful through their natural resources, whether it be timber, oil, things like that. We've had to really become really inventive, and one of the things that we started looking at a number of years ago was e-commerce. How can we utilize the internet to bring those things to our tribe? And our first foray was obviously an online gift store. We did some of that stuff. We still do. It's mainly for our tribal members. It's nice, but it gets the wheels turning. What else can you do? And through our experiences in economic development, we've come across short-term lending via the internet as a really good vehicle for our tribe to be able to engage in e-commerce. And we started off in a small way. We've expanded greatly over the past 10 years. And when I say that it levels the playing field, it gives a tribe like us the opportunity to go out nationwide, reach consumers, customers that want to do business with us, and really bring those into our community. We're not limited by our footprint that in our tribal reservation areas. So if you're inventive, you're able to provide a good product via the internet, e-commerce-wise. You can bring those customers to your community, bring those dollars into your community, and you're not limited by the boundaries of your community. So when we say it levels the playing field, if you can really develop a product, a service that is in demand, there's a lot you can do as a tribal nation. And there's obviously a lot that goes into that by setting up the proper rules, regulations, et cetera. But I really think that it's a next real area for especially our isolated tribes to be able to engage in economic development.
Thank you, Chairman. I think you're absolutely right, especially as you mentioned with tribes, as so many are located in extremely rural areas that not only does this allow you to, like you said, bring a customer base that otherwise wouldn't exist onto the reservation via the internet, but at the same time creates a mechanism to then create jobs for tribal members that want to stay in the community. So that sort of double-sided effect is really amazing. Bill, let's kind of turn it over to you again. A different business model. We're talking lending money, coffee. Obviously, you're a small business owner. What has the internet done for you? I mean, it sounds like it's made essentially your entire career, but tell us what that's looked like.
I got into online business in '96. I bought a company or invested in a company in Florida called Flowers Direct. It was an 800 company, and you called in over the 800 line and ordered flowers and shipped them across the country. And the internet came along, and we eventually bought eflowers.com and were able to really grow that. The technology in those days, it cost us $500,000 to build a website that you can probably build today for $5,000. And we've been through 4 generations of different types of internet platforms, and so the opportunity for the nations across the country are so enormous, because it does give you, like John was saying, it gives a chance for a different type of business within the tribes, and we're just in the beginning of the online business. You might think that it's been around a long time, but it really hasn't. Things that are coming out the next couple of years are going to be so much different than today. We talk about the Vice President said this morning, the 5G and having the access and being in a rural community where it is hard to get trained people, and the opportunity is to train your own people and to be able to give them good jobs. And I just see just a real opportunity out there.
And certainly, in addition to all of the business opportunities that exist with the internet, what you said just made me think of educational opportunities. Being able to get a full degree or even beyond a bachelor's degree, 100% online. I know we had talked yesterday about, again, kind of touching on the internet, that you may have a community where someone may not have running water, but they probably still have a Facebook account. There is strong connectivity out there, and with the swipe of a screen, you're sort of transported to all kinds of different places. So, as you mentioned, the opportunities are really limitless. To touch on what Chairman Shotton had said, anybody can theoretically start a business online. It sounds like a great idea, but there are obviously steps you want to follow, and I'm sure many small business owners and larger businesses have learned the hard way of essentially not doing things right the first time around. So I'd like to turn things over to Maranda to really break this down for us. And I know this in and of itself could be an entire episode here, but if you could kind of talk us through the legalities, things that not only tribes perhaps want to be mindful of, tribal businesses. We've talked a lot about sovereignty being a competitive edge. I think sometimes that can be used against us as well, as we've seen in some cases recently. So Maranda, if you could kind of give us some background on what tribal businesses should really be aware of when perhaps entering into the e-commerce space.
Absolutely, and I would proceed with caution. Something that the chairman just mentioned is that it is a great opportunity, but there's also a lot of responsibility that comes with that. From a tribal perspective, the idea of the internet is a fantastic opportunity because technology is location elastic. You can be anywhere. And to kind of build off what my fellow panelists said before, our economies were very extractive. You take your resources and you got to sell them to someone elsewhere. You build a wind farm, you're trying to interconnect. Your best and your brightest go off to Dartmouth and then go to a city so that they can repay those student loans, which I'm still paying off. But so these businesses are an incredible opportunity to keep those resources within your economy and have the dollar turn over 3 or 4 times. What's really important to do while you're building your business is build up your regulatory environment. And what Mika said is that sovereignty is an opportunity, but it's also a responsibility. So think about Delaware. It's the Delaware corporate model. Almost every corporation in the country is incorporated in Delaware. Delaware is this tiny little state on the East Coast that most people have never been to, but they have created a regulatory structure that is very beneficial and predictable for corporations. When you think about starting an online industry from a tribal perspective, that's what you have to think about. You have to create a regulatory environment that is predictable, easily accessible to outsiders, and easily understandable. So when you're, say, entering the financial services industry, you want to make sure you have a regulator. You want to make sure you have tribal law. And the wonderful thing about that is not only are you building economies that will help your citizens, but those are also sovereign activities. That is developing your governmental structure and flexing your sovereignty muscles to develop laws that are both culturally appropriate and serve your community, but can be accessed by others. So I have to think about the internet as an opportunity for, if you think of it like a gaming context. We created casinos that outsiders could come into, they access our jurisdiction, and they game there. The internet, people get in their internet cars. If you think of it like an internet car, they get in their internet car, they drive to the boundaries of your jurisdiction, your reservation, via the internet, and you allow them into your jurisdiction, and you want to make sure that their entire trip there is easily understood and predictable. So from a governmental perspective, I think you really want to make sure you have that regulatory structure, just like Delaware and gaming and elsewhere. From an operations perspective, this is a quickly moving and developing area of the law, but I would recommend that you follow a few key steps to make sure that your entities, if you would like them to be arms of your tribe, meet certain standards. One, you have to be very sure that the creation of those entities follows your tribal law. You have all appropriate tribal resolutions that create the entities under tribal law. You want to make sure it's very clear what authority these entities have to go out and interact with others. And you also want to make sure you have some basic controls. Does that mean that you have to control absolutely every point of the operation? No. That is, like, from a business standpoint, entirely impractical. But you do need to make sure that you have some ultimate controls on the business. And then you also need to understand that or you should understand the difference between individually owned companies and tribally owned companies, and make sure that there are clear regulatory structures for each of those, and that it's understood what authority each of those entities have. So that's kind of the Cliff Notes version. It's very quick, but it is a great opportunity, but also a very serious responsibility that you need to be thoughtful and strategic about. But if you do it appropriately, you're setting yourself and your tribal members up for tremendous success.
Thanks, Miranda. And that was the Cliff Notes version, because I think I've heard the longer version before, too. We can't kind of stress this enough, and I know this came up again yesterday, this idea, even for small businesses, when we had the panel of small businesses up here, and we were talking about, do all of you have an accounting background? Are each of you a CPA in addition to being the CEO and all the other duties? Very rarely does that happen, and I think that as small business owners, that's sort of matter of fact. People expect that. There's nothing wrong with that. Unfortunately, it seems with tribes, there is this this idea that, well, the tribe should be doing everything. And let's take, this casino, for example. Obviously, this is a gigantic facility. There's, I don't even know how many rooms are located here. This conference center we're in, all the food and beverage, all of the casinos, all the machines, all of the pool, the different facilities here. I don't know how many people it takes to manage this day in, day out. I imagine it's quite a lot. And do we think that the person who is the general manager of this facility actually does all of those jobs or knows how to do all of those jobs? Absolutely not. And again, that would, Superman couldn't do that. So the same can be said about an online business. Chairman Shotton, can you talk a little bit about how it's important to try to certainly harness skill sets that you have within the tribe, help people build on those different skills as the business matures, but that it is important to go out and seek expertise to make sure that the business is going to be set up, obviously, turning to legal counsel as needed, making sure that all your various regulatory codes are in place, having a sound accounting structure, but just also a little bit about what that workforce development looks like and how over time various portions of the business can be brought essentially more in-house as you hire people within who are able to be trained to do the various tasks.
Well, there's a lot of things to cover there, but I think piggybacking on what Miranda said, obviously setting up your tribal law in the proper way, making sure that you've got a really good legal review, input from your council that set up the appropriate boards, authorities, regulatory authorities. The tribal controls are in place to be engaged in any business, whether it be gaming, lending, retail, whatever it might be. If it's a tribally owned business, you want to make sure that it's addressed in tribal law, and there's rules governing it and regulatory frameworks to govern that, taxes, those types of things. But if you look at the history of tribal economic development, a lot of our tribes have great ideas about things to develop projects, whether it be casinos, tourism, banks, whatever it might be. And they don't necessarily have all the resources in their communities. They've got an idea, they might have one good content expert person, but they've got a lot of connections they can utilize. So as a tribal leader, as a chairman of a tribe, when we have something we want to do, we go out and find the best people available to make it a reality. Sometimes it's members of other tribes. Sometimes we have the expertise in-house or part of the expertise. Sometimes we have to go out and hire outsiders to help us. But in the long-term goal is that we bring these individuals in, and we utilize their expertise for a period of time. They help us get an enterprise off the ground. We train our tribal members that are interested or other members of our community, and eventually we start taking these positions in our various areas of the business back. And when we talk about casinos, the natural progression for a lot of tribes was food and beverage, security, those things first. A couple years later, it might be accounting. They may have identified an individual they could train as a general manager from, any area of the casino. Once they've gained some experience and followed or mentored, they can eventually be the general manager as a tribal member if we didn't already have somebody in place like that. So really being able to get this idea, an enterprise off the ground, from my perspective, we've got to go out and find the individuals or the companies, the consultants to help us get started, to make it a reality. And then slowly, or hopefully quickly, as the tribal entity, we can start taking over components until we have full control of all the areas. Sometimes it just doesn't make sense. If you run a huge corporation and you outsource accounting, we may never have enough tribal members to run the accounting department of a huge facility like this. That's just a reality. Even in our tribal government and our administrations, we have to rely upon people. We're not 100% tribal employment. We've got other tribal members from different tribes, non-Indians that work for us, and that we need those people to implement our tribal governmental services. It's no different in our tribal businesses, but the tribe owns it, has control over it, regulates it, and that's the important thing.
What you said about developing workforce sort of when it makes sense. I think in a perfect world, every person working in this casino would be a Cherokee Nation citizen. I think it's actually a quite large number, but if you look at things from a business perspective, wouldn't you always want to also make sure you had the best person? And costs can't be ignored too. So I think it's very realistic to say, yes, this is certainly there is an intention. I know many tribes and many tribal corporations have Indian preferential hiring, and I think that's a wonderful thing. Obviously, we are a small subset of the U.S. population, and if we're limiting to the point where we never looked outside, I think that would also be limiting for the business too. So I appreciate what you said on that, Chairman. Bill, I want to turn things over to you again, looking at it as a personal entrepreneur as well. You had mentioned that you love roasting coffee and everything now, and I think you really do have a passion for the product. What are some of the pieces of the business that you still very much control yourself or in-house, or other pieces that you've outsourced? And I would imagine with web development, when you mentioned one of your earlier websites costing $500,000 to build, and as we know today, Wix.com, I can build a website in about 30 minutes for free. what that has looked like for you in terms of what expertise you've brought in-house, what you've had to outsource. Again, just what always made sense for me from a business perspective when entering the e-commerce world, especially when it was so new, as you mentioned, 1996, I think it was. I don't even really know when the internet was invented, and I'm using air quotes because I know like the military had it for a long time before it was used for public use, but that's very cutting edge. And the Flowers Direct, I mean, I remember that, and I actually used one of the other flower websites recently. It's amazing now to think things that we didn't used to do online, like shopping for the most part. But talk us through a little bit about that piece, about what the workforce piece has looked like for you in this industry.
Well, the technology has changed so rapidly. After we sold Flowers Direct and eFlowers.com 2002, my son had graduated from OU, and we started a company called Traffic Strategies, and it was a lead generation. We sold mortgage leads and real estate leads, and a long story short, he was in San Francisco late one night and ran into the Rakuten Corporation, and they thought they wanted to buy it. The time was 2007, and they came to Tampa and they bought us. And 8 months later, there was not a real estate or mortgage business in this country. We were in a full-fledged recession. And I'll just have to tell you, that was just a blessing from God, because we were then able to go and buy a lot of other online properties, domains. Today we own hundreds of domains. And I think that's one of the most important aspects. If you enter into the business, you have to have the right domain. And typically that's going to be owned by somebody else. And I bought most of mine on the second market, typically in the neighborhood of $10,000 to $25,000. I've never been a person that registered many domains. And I haven't sold very many. I have sold some, and we have some on the market today. We also own a number of single-word domains today, such as bouquet.com. We own buycarinsurance.com, and the list can go on. But I think today we have support from all over the world. We have programmers in Bangladesh. We have a programmer in Kenya, Africa. They all work our schedule. They start about 5 a.m., which is evening their time, and work through midday here. We've had to internally grow the capabilities of our staff. We do a lot of it in-house, but we also access a lot of support all over the country. And you can do that today. We have 6 to 7 people online in the online company, and they are on video all day long, so they can talk to each other just like they were in the next room. And I think that's what really opens the door for our people to be able to expand on it.
And now, a quick message from the sponsor of this episode of the Native Business Podcast, Ukukti Consulting and JoyHuntington.com. Ukukti Consulting is a statewide communications and community relations firm serving a variety of public and private sector clients. Joy Huntington, Ukukti's Consulting's president and principal consultant, has lived in rural Alaska for 15 years and has an in-depth understanding of socioeconomic, cultural, environmental, and political issues that face rural communities. Ukukti Consulting brings positive energy and promotes meaningful relationships for projects and companies across Alaska through effective communications, outreach, and facilitation efforts. Joy Huntington, who has received the Alaska Federation of Natives President's Award for Future Leadership and the Doyon Limited Future Leadership Award, has also been featured in Native Business Magazine as one of the 2019 Native Business Top 50 Entrepreneurs. She is very involved in bettering Native communities and recently launched the Joy Huntington brand of products and services to facilitate her work across Indian country. Her services include motivational speaking, youth engagement, career planning and coaching, journaling workshops, mentoring women in business, and entrepreneurial workshops. For more information on Ukukti Consulting, please visit uqaqti.com, ukukti.com. And for more information about Joy Huntington, please visit joyhuntington.com today. That's JoyHuntington.com today. If you'd like to sponsor the Native Business Podcast, please email us at sponsor at nativebusinessmag.com. And now we return you to the Native Business Podcast.
Back to exactly what we were talking about leveling the playing field, when now you're able to pull expertise literally at this point from all over the world and be agile in your business. As you mentioned, buying web domains, that's genius. You know, I mean, you think about all these one-word businesses now that probably came to be because they were searching to buy a web domain and found kind of a funny-sounding word, and I can't think of, like, maybe that's Fandango. I don't know. But you also, I think that's interesting what you mentioned, that, you know, when you were in the lead generation business for real estate, and it sounds like that was somewhat accidental, you know, just another sort of business line that you all fell into, and then, you know, thankfully were able to get out of it before the recession happened. So accidental things can happen in business as well. And I think just being kind of always looking at what that next industry might be, the lead generation piece, the direct advertising piece, I know that plays a huge role in financial services as well. I don't know if Chairman Shotton or Maranda, you want to speak to that a little bit. Being able to go out and truly find customers at sort of their cusp of need is something that I think, especially the financial service business, has been really good at doing. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Maranda.
When you operate a tribal business, at least from the tribal business perspective, you're thinking access, you're thinking responsible, you know, corporate responsibility, and you're thinking evolution. So to kind of touch on each of those, starting with access, you're going to offer a product, a service that others would like to utilize or own, and those others are typically located elsewhere. That's the real benefit of the internet. So finding those customers, one, as Chairman said, you want to make sure you have a really strong product and a strong regulatory environment, and then two, you have to go out and have the customers find you, really, and that's the way I think of it. Make people, allow them to know that this product exists, and there's lots of services that will help you do that. And to also talk about Bill's point, there is nothing wrong with utilizing outside services to run your business, and those services can include capital markets and financial services to give you the money necessary to run your businesses. Those services can be accounting, they can be lead generation, they can be marketing, but all of those services are typical business relationships that will allow you to have a successful product and provide for your citizens. You want to do that responsibly, but there is nothing wrong with going out and seeking those services. And in fact, it's really important initially to make sure that you have those services so that you can run your company appropriately. And then kind of going to the last point, which is evolution. Over time, it's going to make sense as you learn the lead generation business, or as you learn different servicing industries, to kind of bring those in-house. And those will create the opportunities for your tribal members. You think about the gaming analogy, which is just readily available, so people utilize it often. You have a 7-year term on a management agreement. And over those 7 years, the idea is that you start to bring some of those services in-house. And I would recommend thinking about your online businesses and your new industries in that same way. Think about it for a term of 7 or 10 years. In 7 or 10 years, if it makes business sense, you should bring some of those services in-house. But starting your company and starting in a new industry, it's actually the responsible thing to do, to go out and seek some of those services, and it'll allow you to be more successful from a sort of corporate business perspective.
Thanks, Miranda. I think that's an excellent point. And I going back to lead gen again, I'm kind of in my mind thinking, you know, I could create the most amazing product that everybody's going to want and have an incredible website, but if nobody comes to my site, I might as well not exist. So, you know, I think obviously, of course, we need the codes in place and the structure and the compliance and accounting. But, you know, people need to be able to find these businesses too. The business is only a business because there's a customer that wants to buy that service or product. Chairman Shotton, this question is for you. Again, looking at this from a tribally owned business perspective, you touched on this a little in your earlier remarks, but I want to talk and hear a little bit more from you about the true impact of e-commerce, especially for the Otoe-Missouria Tribe or other tribes that you're aware of working in similar industry, and what the sort of the opportunity scope looks like for other tribes that may find themselves feeling maybe economically stagnant, or just saying, okay, we've diversified to the point that we sort of feel comfortable, but what's next, and really understanding that, you know, that next frontier is on the internet. So can you just share with us a little bit about what this business has done for the tribe?
As I mentioned earlier, you know, I think every person that wants to run for a tribal council or seeks elective office or is lucky enough to get put on a tribal council by their people, they've all got really good ideas about how to improve their community. And they've all got thoughts about things that we need. But I always bring it back to, that's real good and appreciate your idea, but how do we implement that? And the only way to implement that is with economic resources. It's up to the tribal leaders to figure out, first of all, how to get the resources. You know, at Otoe-Missouria, we've done nothing but economic development because of the size of our tribe, our location, et cetera. Government grants and programs, we maxed out. They haven't changed in years. Actually, some of them actually went down. It's a more competitive environment, and there's just not much resource allocated at the government level. So we've chosen to look at how do we improve our economic status by developing tribal businesses that are going to bring revenue to our tribe. And like I said, we went through the typical casinos, things we can do locally. We have some other service businesses. But the internet really provided us an opportunity through our lending businesses to bring real revenues in. And it's hard to explain to non-tribal people, but these revenues provide life and death services to our tribal members. You know, simple things that are available in other communities that aren't available where we live: daycare, utility assistance, you know, just job opportunities for one. The overflow of the revenues that come in from our lending businesses, which are turned into programs of the tribe, which provide opportunities to implement those programs, it's huge. That money doesn't only go directly to the tribal council, it rolls over into economic development, law enforcement, social programs. We're able to fund extra Head Start classrooms, totally daycare center, totally funded by the tribe, support our senior program, a lot of extraordinary services for our tribal members for health services and different things that would not be available. You know, when you look at it from the outside, I've had people look me in the face and, well, you guys only made $16 million on that endeavor. Some of your partners have made more money. I was like, $16 million in Red Rock, Oklahoma is a whole lot of money. It's the difference between people having their lights turned off, living without heat for the winter, food on their table. So we work very hard to make sure we have those resources at the tribal council. And, you know, I'm offended when people say things like that to me. And, you know, those of you that are familiar with the online industry, there's terms thrown out there like rent a tribe, things like that I find very offensive. And our tribe and a lot of the tribes I work with have worked very hard to develop frameworks to regulate and implement tribal businesses to bring revenues to their tribal communities. And those revenues directly affect our tribal members and their livelihoods. So I'm a huge supporter of it. I'm going to continue to be a supporter of it. But I don't think sometimes the outside communities realize that the dollars that come to our tribal communities are actually providing life and death services that would otherwise not be available to people because they don't recognize where we come from, they don't recognize the rural locations we live in, and the lack of infrastructure we have in our tribal communities. And it's important that we share that amongst not only our other tribes who are fortunate enough to be in places like this wonderful facility and in more populated areas, but to the outside communities that don't understand our tribal governance and our tribal government issues.
Yeah, to build on everything the chairman said, I would also just note that a lot of e-commerce is being challenged right now by non-native people who one, set very different standards for native businesses, which I think is inappropriate for a number of reasons, and two, have a real lack of understanding of native economies. And so to speak out like the chairman does, I think is important because, 16 million, someone says, well, your investors made more money. First of of all, investors always make more money. That's literally how business works. Think of any startup. The CEO of Facebook or the CEO of Instagram went 3 years without a paycheck. Their investors made a bunch of money, and they eventually did make an income. But those beginning years of a startup, of a new business, the people who are founding the business will often not have the greatest economic benefit. And two, $16 million to the Otoe-Missouria Tribe. I mean, I don't know the figures, but I would imagine that's more than a third of your general revenue. And federal income taxes account for a third of the United States revenue. So this business is literally providing to the Native nation what more than federal income taxes provide to the United States. And you would never say that federal income taxes are not important. Well, I would if it meant I didn't have to pay them, but you would never say that. So I think it's really essential that unfortunately, as we enter these industries, we have to let the non-Native folks know what they mean to our communities. And I would also recommend that whether you're in tribal lending or not, there's a lot of litigation going on right now where folks are challenging what it means to be an arm of the tribe, and what it means for a tribe to enter a business, and what it means for tribes to engage in commerce. To go off on a small little tangent, I think it's easy to stereotypically think of tribes and tribal people as living in the historic past. And when you see court cases about hunting and fishing rights, those make sense to people. But the reason this conference is so important and this conversation is so important is that Native people are modern people, and we engage in modern economies, and showing that to non-Native people is important, because otherwise you end up with the cases that you see right now in tribal lending that are really paternalistic and show an ignorance of what tribal communities are like.
Thank you for that, Maranda. And that's an excellent segue. And again, we could spend a lot of time talking about that piece as well. I know that you were on a panel yesterday that probably touched on a lot of those topics. But again, with this being a recorded podcast, it's great to be able to share that with more folks. You bring up a lot of excellent points that, what people see and sort of deem to be a tribal business is changing. And it's very easy for tribes to be pigeonholed as they have been. People think of tribes, they immediately think of casinos. That's just the way it is. Or they think of smoke shops. And, there are so many other businesses out there, and whether they are tribally owned or individual Native owned, government contracting is now obviously a sort of on the main stage for tribal businesses, but that wasn't. And as many of you, I'm sure, aware, there's a lot of scrutiny over probably the 8A program, and people thinking that, tribes or minority owned businesses shouldn't get this supposed leg up. Which I think is unfair for a lot of reasons as well. And Chairman Shotton, thank you for your remarks as well. I know that can sometimes probably be an unpopular opinion, but I think it's important to go out and say, we as a tribe have entered into this business. We have every right to do so, and to have that questioned is very unfair. And it really takes a multitude of voices to go out and make that, be known to folks. And I know, Maranda, I'm sure this probably keeps you up at night, because there is a lot happening in this environment right now, and it is I think scary for other tribal businesses to realize what's being questioned about sort of the legality of their work, and that's something that I really believe the entire Indian community and all of Indian country needs to be aware of. So that serves as a bit of a cautionary tale. I didn't mean to get so dark. I want to talk about some of the good things that are happening too. I know, Chairman Shotton, you talked about all the different social services that are frankly able to be paid for because of the revenues of these tribal businesses, and I think that's the case with a lot of tribal businesses. I'm sure many of you have heard, or people will approach you when they find out you're Native American and say, "Oh, you get free health care, right?" Well, yeah, but for me, when I was living in Washington, D.C., the closest Indian clinic was like 10-hour drive away. That's not realistic to think that if I was having a medical emergency, I would drive that distance. Or the other popular one, you get a per capita check, right? Again, not everyone gets those. Or you must, your college must have been free, or my favorite is you must get into every college, which is not true. But it's this idea that, we're, as Native people, we're completely being taken care of by the federal government, which is problematic for several reasons. But Chairman Shotton, as you know, those funds those funds run dry, and we as Native people are a growing population, and as everyone I'm sure is aware, is those budget cuts are real, and they are happening administration after administration. But again, we went down a little bit of a rabbit hole there, but this is what these kind of podcasts and conversations are for. I do want to hear from each of you on where you think all of this is going, and please, once again, put on that original lens you were looking in that hat. So Maranda, we want to hear from you, what the future is in terms of e-commerce for tribes from a legal perspective. Chairman Shotton, we want to hear about your perspective as a tribal leader and what this means for Indian nations. And Bill, we want to hear from you as a private business owner. What is the opportunity scope look like with e-commerce? Where is all of this going? So with that, Maranda.
I think e-commerce is really exciting. I mean, this panel shows the diverse opportunities that are out there. And one of the real opportunities I see is that for most of modern times, tribal nations have come to the table where after everyone has staked out their territory. So you think in terms of taxes. And a quick note on tribal governments and taxes for any non-native listeners, tribes don't really have a tax base. They can't tax property that's in trust. Income tax is not readily available, so tribes don't really have a tax base unless you're doing sales tax or throughput, some sort of excise tax. But when you come to that tax table, that pie has already been split up. The federal government sometimes takes a piece, states take a piece, and so tribes are trying to wedge themselves in there. When you think of e-commerce, of internet jurisdiction, of consumer data privacy, of blockchain, of cryptocurrency, all of those regulatory spheres are still being developed right now. And there's a real opportunity for tribes to step in and own a space of that while others have not. So you could see in 2 to 3 years a state actually using a tribe's data privacy laws as a basis for their own. How incredible would that be? States borrowing from us, as they should, in some situations in the regulatory sphere. So when you think of e-commerce, I think of it as something that's still up in the air and a real opportunity for us to lay claim to an area on our own terms and participate in the commerce on our own terms from our reservations, feeding and fueling and serving and providing for our own people. So that's the part that, while some areas keep me up at night, that's the part that I wake up every morning excited to think, what can Indian country bring to this new developing world today?
Bill, please.
First of all, I believe that we are in the infancy of the internet, and there is a lot of opportunities. If you're looking at getting into business, I think that an acquisition where you would acquire a lot of the technology and the age of the domain, there's just a lot of things that go into it. Chairman, I know that he's in the financial business, and you don't just register a domain today and say, I'm going to be in his business and be successful. It takes years and years, and so a small acquisition might just put you right there in the front of the lead. And I think today, if you're going to be in the online business, you need to think you are competing with the biggest people in that industry. Whether it's in auto insurance, you need to compete against Geico and other major companies. Same thing in the financial services business. When you're online, you're competing against everybody. So I'd encourage the tribes to look at acquisitions. We have opportunities come our way every day, from red wagon companies to table manufacturers who are primarily sell online through Amazon and other methods.
Thanks, Bill. And that does bring up an interesting point of, while having an online business, it levels the playing field in some ways, it also means, like you said, that you are competing against every other online business. So sort of high stakes, high reward, I guess. Chairman Shotton, again, from your perspective, both as chairman of your own tribe, but also for Indian country as a whole, as you've mentioned, e-commerce has been a bit of a newer field that folks have gotten into, and I think a lot of tribes are seeing what's out there and are certainly interested. So, in your opinion, where do you see things going, and what's some advice, some additional advice you would give to other tribal leaders out there, or other tribal leaders listening who are interested in the space?
Well, the way I look at it is, personally, I do everything on the internet. I don't like going to the store. Stuff gets shipped to my house from Amazon. You can download any entertainment you want through Netflix, or you can order services. You want your car detailed, you get on the internet, the guy comes to your house. Those kind of things. I don't think of myself as an older person, but middle-aged now, So kids younger than me, they do everything. My kids do everything. So if you're going to be in economic development, especially as a tribe, you get to think in that manner. There's no way not to be on the internet. There's no way not to be on social media. There's no way not to provide those services via the internet, because you're not going to compete. And if we look a generation or two in front of us, I don't know that people are going to gamble the same way they gamble now in places like this. There's a lot of things happening in the world that are going to cause some significant changes, and tribes need to be very aware of their future economic development, that they're engaged in e-commerce, they have a good understanding and good people working for them, that the way in which they bring consumers to their reservation, however, in whatever industry, it's going to be an integral part of it. It already is, but it's only going to get more important. We all operate via our iPhone right now. We pay our bills, we communicate with people, we read our email every day or whatever form you use. When I can't find people at the tribe, I have my secretary hit them up on social media. Sometimes it's the only way to get a hold of people. I can't reiterate strongly enough how important e-commerce is to the future of tribal nations. If you're not going to be engaging in e-commerce for economic development, you've got to figure out how you can use the internet to provide services to your tribal members, to provide governmental services to your tribe. So there's just no way around it. That's the future in front of us. It's actually a reality right now, but it's only become more and more important.
Certainly, and I think that the Facebook example you gave is a funny one, that sometimes that is the best way to get a hold of people. And I think Indian people are very connected via social media, which again is can be a wonderful thing. We talked about that in an earlier panel as well. Lots to think about. Obviously, this is a very evolving environment, and I'm sure we'll keep Maranda practicing law for a long time. But I think the big takeaways are, know what you're getting into, ask the right questions, have the right mechanisms in place, understand your competition. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into this, and it's not a decision to be made lightly. So I certainly invite those individuals thinking about getting into e-commerce to ask the right questions, perhaps reach out to our panelists. And then obviously for tribes, this is a very big decision and one not to be made lightly. But thank you very much to my panelists, Maranda Compton, Chairman Shotton, Bill McClure. My name is Mika Leonard again. Thank you on behalf of the Native Business Podcast.